I was in the back seat when I saw her step off the jet in a white suit, sunlight flashing against the wings behind her. My heart jumped so fast I couldn't breathe, because after all those months of silence, it was her. I ran before Dad could say a word, terrified she might disappear again. The sputtering began just after 6 in the morning, the kind of strained cough that made even a mechanic wince. Jack Marshall set down the wrench he'd been using to tighten a bracket on an old Ford pickup and wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag that had long since given up being clean. For a moment, he just listened. The same sound, the same time, every morning for the past week. That stubborn tractor down the road, trying to come alive and refusing. He sighed, tugged on his worn work boots, and stepped out into the cool air. Gravel crunched under his feet as he walked the 200 yards toward the neighbor's farmhouse. It had seen better days, paint peeling from the clapboards, gutters sagging like tired shoulders, and a yard scattered with tools and parts. It reminded Jack of someone fighting a battle with too many fronts at once. "Need a hand?" he called as he reached the fence line. The woman crouched beside the faded red Massey Ferguson straightened and pushed her ball cap back with the back of her wrist. Auburn strands slipped loose, brushing her cheeks. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a fire in them, the kind of stubborn determination Jack respected instantly. "Only if you're certified in miracles," she shot back, her voice roughened by frustration but edged with humor. Jack grinned, leaning casually on the fence post. "Well, I'm a single dad who fixes trucks for a living. Around here, miracles are just part of the job description." The woman huffed a laugh and shook her head. "Then you might be overqualified." Jack stepped closer, scanning the machine. He recognized the problem immediately: clogged fuel lines, maybe a cracked gasket. The kind of issue that required patience more than brute force. He glanced at her hands, stained with grease, knuckles scraped. She'd been at it for days, refusing to quit. That alone made him want to stay. "I'm Jack," he said, offering his hand. "Claire." She hesitated, then wiped her palm on her jeans before shaking his hand firmly. No hesitation, no pretending to be helpless. "Well, Claire, looks like you and this old machine have been arguing all week." Her mouth tugged into a half-smile. "And it's winning." Jack chuckled, then crouched beside the tractor, his mind already running through what needed to be done. He should have been at the shop, should have been thinking about the carburetor waiting for him back home, or about what to make Emma for dinner. But instead, he found himself focusing only on this stranger with tired eyes and a broken tractor. They worked side by side through the long day, hands greasy, sleeves rolled up, silence broken by occasional curses from Claire when bolts refused to budge. At first, she tried to keep pace with him, matching every movement, but eventually she laughed, pushing her hair back with the back of her hand. "You're faster than I'll ever be." "You're tougher than most I know," Jack replied, meaning it. She didn't pout, didn't complain, didn't once say she couldn't. She just kept trying, failing, and trying again. By dusk, after hours of effort, the tractor shuddered, coughed, and finally roared to life. The sound filled the fading sky, strong and steady. Claire burst into laughter, a sound that seemed to surprise even her. For a moment, the weariness in her face melted away, and her eyes sparkled like someone remembering joy after too long without it. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. Jack shrugged, trying not to show how much her smile had struck him. Sometimes neighbors just show up. Claire held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, thanks for showing up." Jack looked back at the humming tractor, then at the woman beside it, and wondered why helping her had felt less like a chore and more like the start of something he couldn't quite name. Claire didn't slip out of his thoughts after that first day. At first, Jack figured she'd keep to herself, maybe nod when their paths crossed. But within a week, she was sitting at his kitchen table with Emma, spooning mashed potatoes onto the girl's plate like she'd been there all along. It started small. Jack would pass her farm on his way to town and see her wrestling with a stubborn fence post or bent over an old tool with a scowl. He'd pull over, meaning only to give advice, but somehow ended up staying, hammer in hand, or holding boards while she nailed them in place. Claire never played helpless, never asked him to do the work for her. She'd roll her eyes, shove her ball cap lower, and mutter, "Fine, but only because you're already here." And then they'd work shoulder to shoulder until sweat streaked their shirts and dusk colored the sky. Emma noticed first. "Dad, "Is Miss Claire coming for dinner again?" she asked one evening, her voice bright with the kind of hope Jack hadn't heard in her for a long time. Since her mother's death, meals had been quiet affairs, Jack doing his best to fill the silence with talk about school or garage customers. But Emma was only 10, and grief had made her older in ways she didn't deserve. Claire's laughter, sharp and unguarded, filled that space in a way Jack never could. Sometimes Claire cooked with them, chopping onions at the counter while Emma set the table. Other times, she brought over jars of canned tomatoes from her grandfather's cellar or fresh bread she'd somehow managed to bake after long hours fixing machinery. Jack caught himself watching her more than once. The way her auburn hair slipped free from its tie, the way her tired eyes softened when Emma chattered about her day. He told himself it was nothing, just gratitude, just relief that Emma smiled again. But deep down he knew it was more. One evening, while Claire and Emma sat on the porch steps shelling peas, Jack lingered in the doorway, arms folded. He listened as Claire asked Emma about her math homework, pretending she understood every word even as Emma launched into fractions and long division. The girl's laughter carried across the yard, light and easy. Jack's chest ached with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since his wife's passing, the dangerous thought of what it might be like to share life again. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Jack and Claire stayed out by the barn, finishing a repair on one of her old plows. The lantern light cast long shadows, their shoulders brushing now and then as they worked. Jack cleared his throat. "You don't make things easy, you know." Claire looked up, brow arched. "Excuse me. You could have sold this place, Claire. No one would have blamed you. But you're out here bleeding on rusted bolts like it's life or death." She smirked, tightening a nut with a stubborn twist. "Maybe it is. This farm's all I've got left of him. If I let it rot, what does that say about me?" Jack nodded slowly, watching her face in the flickering light. He thought about his own losses, about the nights he'd sat by Emma's bed pretending not to cry. He didn't say it aloud, but in Claire's grit he saw a mirror of his own fight to hold things together. When the plow finally stood steady, Claire leaned against the wall, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Thanks, Jack, for everything. You've already done more than most neighbors would." Jack gave a short laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes neighbors just show up, remember?" She smiled faintly, eyes holding his for a moment too long. Then she looked away, tucking a loose strand of hair beneath her cap. It happened without warning. One morning, the farmhouse down the gravel road stood silent, its porch light off, its windows blank. Jack noticed first when he didn't hear the tractor sputtering at dawn. He waited, listening for the familiar cough of the engine, but only birdsong filled the air. By noon, curiosity gnawed at him enough to drive over. The yard looked abandoned, tools stacked neatly by the barn, the old Massey Ferguson sitting still and quiet. Jack knocked on the door, his knuckles echoing too loudly against the wood. No answer. He waited, knocked again, then tried the handle. Locked. The place felt sealed, like someone had shut it all down in a hurry. Back home, Emma sat at the kitchen table coloring when he walked in. She looked up eagerly. "Is Miss Claire coming for dinner?" Jack froze. He couldn't bring himself to say the truth, that Claire was gone and he had no idea why. Instead, he forced a smile and shook his head. "Not tonight, kiddo. Maybe she's busy." But days stretched into weeks, and Claire never came. Emma asked every evening at first, then every other night, until finally she stopped asking altogether. Jack hated the way her shoulders slumped when she realized Claire wasn't coming back. His daughter had lost a mother once already. To watch her lose someone else, even someone she'd only known a short while, was a cruelty Jack hadn't been prepared for. At night, after Emma went to bed, Jack sat alone in the garage. He found himself staring at the empty chair where Claire had sat while holding a lantern, or at the half-drunk coffee cup she'd once left on the workbench. He tried to reason through it, but there was no explanation that fit. She hadn't owed him anything, yet she had folded herself into their lives so seamlessly, only to vanish like a shadow at sunrise. Sometimes he caught himself rehearsing conversations he'd never have. "Why didn't you say goodbye, Claire? Was it something I did? Were we just a distraction until you found your footing?" The questions never had answers, and silence became his only companion. Emma, though, gave voice to what Jack couldn't. One night, as he tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Did she stop liking us, Dad?" Her small voice cracked on the last word. Jack's throat tightened. He brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and forced the calmest answer he could manage. No, sweetheart. Sometimes people have to leave, even when they don't want to. But when he left her room and closed the door, he leaned against the hallway wall, fists clenched at his sides. He had faced the loss of his wife with as much strength as he could muster, but Claire's absence carved a different kind of wound, one built from confusion and unfinished words. For months, the farmhouse remained quiet, its windows blank, its porch collecting dust. Jack avoided looking at it when he drove past, but every time, he felt the same hollow twist in his chest. Emma missed Claire fiercely, and though Jack tried to stay strong, the truth was simple. He missed her, too. The letter came on a Wednesday afternoon, tucked between a pile of bills and a feed store flyer. Jack almost missed it. He was halfway through sorting when the return address caught his eye, New York. His hands stilled. None of his family lived there, and no one he knew would bother sending mail from that far away. He turned it over, studying the unfamiliar handwriting across the front. For a moment, his chest tightened. He carried the envelope into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and slid it open with his pocket knife. A single sheet of paper slid out, folded neatly, almost carefully. He unfolded it slowly, like it might break apart if he rushed. Jack, I never told you who I was. Not really. I came here to hide, to breathe. But I also came to remember what mattered. You reminded me. You and Emma showed me real kindness without expecting anything back. I had to go back to finish something, but I'll return if you'll still have me. Claire. Jack read the words twice, then a third time, as if repetition might make them steadier, less surreal. His pulse hammered in his ears. She hadn't disappeared because she'd stopped caring. She'd left because she had another life, one she'd hidden from them. A life big enough, complicated enough, to pull her away without warning. He let the letter rest on the table, staring at it like it might vanish. Part of him felt relief. The silence, the emptiness, finally explained. Another part bristled with anger. Why didn't you just say something, Claire? Why make us wonder if we mattered at all? A quiet shuffle pulled him from his thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway, her hair messy from her nap. She blinked at him, then at the letter in his hand. Who's that from, Dad? Jack hesitated. She had carried Claire's absence like a secret wound, one he'd tried and failed to soothe. He held up the letter. It's from Claire. Emma's eyes widened. She hurried to the table, pulling herself onto the chair beside him. She wrote to us? Jack nodded and slid the paper toward her. Emma leaned in, lips moving silently as she read. By the time she finished, tears were gathering in her eyes, but she was smiling. She's coming back, Emma whispered, gripping his arm. She said so. Jack swallowed hard, torn between caution and hope. She said she will if we'll still have her. Emma looked up at him fiercely, with the kind of certainty only a child could hold. We will. Right, Dad? We'll still have her. Jack stared at his daughter, at the hope glowing in her face, and felt something shift inside him. He couldn't promise the future, couldn't shield Emma from the possibility of disappointment. But he also couldn't deny the truth. Despite everything, despite the confusion and the pain, he wanted Claire back, too. He folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and placed it back in its envelope. Yeah, he said softly, meeting Emma's gaze. We will. 8 weeks after the letter arrived, spring sunlight spilled across the county airstrip. Jack's old Ford rumbled down the narrow road, gravel dust curling in the rearview. He hadn't told Emma much beyond, we'll see who's coming in today. Still, she was practically bouncing in the back seat, her nose pressed against the glass. The airstrip wasn't much, just a single worn runway, a faded hangar, and a windsock that barely moved in the breeze. Jack had been here dozens of times, mostly to fix tractors or farm trucks for the mechanics who kept the runway serviceable. He had never in his life expected to see what waited there now, a sleek private jet, gleaming white beneath the afternoon sun. Emma gasped so loudly he almost swerved. Dad, look! Look! Her small hand pointed, trembling with excitement. It's her. It has to be her. Jack's heart kicked hard against his ribs. His first instinct was disbelief. Claire belonged in work boots, jeans stained with dirt, auburn hair escaping from a ball cap. The image of her stepping off that plane seemed impossible. And yet, as the stairs unfolded and the cabin door swung open, there she was. Claire appeared at the top of the steps, sunlight catching in her hair. She wasn't dressed for farm chores now. A crisp white suit, perfectly cut, framed her figure, her shoulders squared with quiet authority. But her eyes, searching, nervous, almost fragile, were the same ones that had watched a tractor roar back to life months ago. Jack pulled the truck to a stop, his hands tightening around the steering wheel. That's your jet?" The words slipped out before he could stop them, half a question to himself, half a stunned exhale. Claire laughed as she descended, the sound carrying across the runway. "Technically, it's the board's jet," she called back, her voice mixing humor with hesitation. "I just borrow it when I need to." Emma didn't wait for permission. She flung the door open and sprinted across the tarmac, her shoes slapping against the pavement. "Miss Claire," she shouted, arms already outstretched. Claire bent quickly, kneeling down as Emma collided with her. The girl wrapped herself around her neck as if afraid to ever let go again. Claire's eyes closed, her cheek pressed against Emma's hair. Jack watched from the truck, his throat thick, the scene blurring for a moment before he forced himself to blink it clear. When Claire finally looked up, her gaze sought only him. Jack stepped out of the truck slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel, still trying to reconcile the woman before him with the neighbor who had laughed beside him under lantern light. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. But in the quiet stretch of that spring afternoon, the airstrip seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Claire stood on the tarmac with Emma clinging to her neck, the wind tugging at the edges of her white suit jacket. Her hand moved slowly over Emma's back, as though reassuring herself the girl was real. Then she looked up at Jack, her eyes searching, uncertain. "I should explain," she said quietly. Jack stopped a few paces away, his arms crossed, jaw tight. Part of him wanted to close the distance, to hold her, to demand why she had left. Another part told him to stay rooted, to let her speak first. "You don't owe me," he began, but Claire cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. "I do." She drew a breath, steadying herself. "When my grandfather died, I left more than just a farm behind. I left a company, Hero Tech. I've been its CEO for 6 years. The jet, the suit." She glanced down at herself, almost ashamed. "That's who I was before I came here. And it nearly destroyed me." Jack blinked, trying to connect the woman who knelt in his gravel driveway repairing plows with the one standing before him now, polished and commanding. "Hero Tech," he repeated slowly. He'd heard of it, a tech giant whose name showed up in magazines and on sponsorship banners. "You run that?" Claire nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "I ran it. Then I ran from it. After my grandfather's funeral, I couldn't breathe anymore. The meetings, the fake smiles, the endless battles in the boardroom, none of it felt like living. So I came back to the farm. I told myself I was just visiting, just helping settle affairs, but really," her voice faltered. "Really, I was hiding." Emma loosened her grip, sliding down to stand beside Claire, though she held tightly to her hand. "But you weren't hiding from us," Emma said, her voice small but firm. Claire's lips trembled with a faint smile. "No, sweetheart. Not from you." Jack ran a hand across his face, still struggling to reconcile the two images of her, Claire with dirt under her nails and Claire stepping off a private jet. "So all that time, you were what? Testing us. Seeing how long it would take for us to find out who you really were." Claire's eyes widened. "No, never. Jack, I didn't want to be that woman with you. I didn't want you to see a title or a company. I wanted you to see me, just me. And you did. You fixed that tractor without asking who I was. You let me into your home, your life, Emma's world, without expecting anything in return." Her voice dropped, almost breaking. That was the first real kindness I'd felt in years. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the plane behind her. Jack studied her, searching for insincerity, for the mask she admitted to wearing in her other life. But all he saw was the woman who had laughed with Emma over homework, who had wiped sweat from her forehead while fighting a rusted bolt, who had vanished not because she wanted to, but because her other world demanded it. He let out a slow breath, his voice quieter now. "You should have told us." "I know," Claire whispered. "And I'm sorry." Emma tugged Jack's sleeve, looking between them anxiously. Jack rested his hand on his daughter's shoulder, grounding himself in her presence. Claire's truth had shaken him, but Emma's wide, hopeful eyes reminded him of what mattered most. Claire straightened slowly, her hand still clasping Emma's. The sharp edges of her white suit seemed out of place against the cracked tarmac and small-town quiet, but her voice trembled with something raw, stripped of polish. "I didn't just come back for me," she said, reaching into the car waiting at the edge of the runway. When she returned, her arms were full, folders, papers, neatly bound forms. She laid them across the hood of Jack's truck like offerings. "These are adoption forms for a local scholarship program. Grants to help farmers in this county repair and modernize their equipment. Investments in small-town futures. In kids like Emma, in families like yours." Jack's eyes narrowed, his arms still folded tight across his chest. He didn't move closer. "You think money fixes everything?" Claire flinched, shaking her head quickly. "No, I know it doesn't. Believe me, I've had more than enough to learn that lesson. But this isn't about money, Jack. This is about showing you what I'm willing to put on the line, not just for this town, but for the life I want with you." Her gaze lifted, steady despite the tremor in her voice. "I want to be part of your family. For good. Not as the neighbor who shows up at dinner. Not as the woman who borrowed your tools. I want to belong here. With you, with Emma, if you'll let me." Emma looked up at her father, her small hand tightening around his. "Dad," she whispered, her eyes wide, brimming with hope. "Say yes." Jack's throat closed. For a long moment, he didn't trust himself to speak. He thought of his wife, gone 3 years now, the hollow quiet that had filled every corner of their house. He thought of Claire kneeling in the dirt beside a broken plow, of her laughter echoing across his porch, of her sudden disappearance that had left them aching. And now here she was, not just returning, but laying her heart and her future at their feet. He swallowed hard, his eyes burning. He looked at Claire, then at Emma, who clung to both of them in spirit, even if only to one in body. The choice wasn't simple, but it was clear. Jack stepped forward, his hand reaching out. He covered Claire's trembling fingers where they rested on the papers, ignoring the suit, the jet, the weight of the world she had carried back with her. All he saw was the woman who had given Emma back her smile. For the first time in a long while, his voice broke. "Welcome home." Claire's breath caught. Emma let out a squeal and threw her arms around both of them, tugging them together until Jack and Claire were holding her and each other in one unsteady embrace. Behind them, the jet's engines ticked as they cooled, the sound fading into the stillness of the spring afternoon. On that small county airstrip, with nothing but gravel, sunlight, and 3 beating hearts, something new was born, not out of money or miracles, but out of simple acts of kindness that had refused to die.